Hi, thank you for coming on to my channel. I'm Tiffany with Makeup and Monarchies. This is my first episode. It is about the War of the Roses. Going forward, all my episodes are going to be a very simplified version of what happened in the UK history. That will be my focus on Great Britain. Its history and its monarchies and just interesting things that happened. So if this sounds like something you would be interested in and would love to hear about, please hit subscribe below. If it is something that if there's something you would like to hear about, please leave me a comment. I am going to list all the makeup I used in the description down below as well, so you can see what I'm using. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. So like I said earlier, we are going to start with the War of the Roses. This is also known as the Cousins' War, but more famously known as the War of the Roses. And the reason it's referred to as the War of the Roses is it's between two factions of the House of Plantagenet and the Yorks and the Lancastrians. I can't talk today. So the Yorks had a white rose as their insignia, and the Lancastrians used a red rose as their insignia. Many years later, the two roses would become the Tudor rose, but we'll get more into that in another episode. So while I could start this subject years before I am starting it, I'm choosing to start where I am because this is the part that has my whole heart. It's my favorite section of time in English history. There's just so much going on at once that it's so fascinating to me. If anybody's really into history and has watched any TV shows based on history, this would be The White Queen that was on, this is cute, huh? Stars, or it was on BBC, I believe BBC over in the UK. So we're picking up in 1461. Before I go into that, actually, I'm going to go over a bit of who we're going to be talking about, because there's a lot of names that are the same, but they had different these people all had different titles. So we have Edward Plantagenet, that became Edward the Fourth. We have his younger brother, George, who becomes Duke of Clarence. And then we have Richard, that becomes the Duke of Gloucester. So there are sometimes I'll refer to each of them as George or Richard. Sometimes I'll refer to them as their title. We also have Richard Neville, who was cousins with the Plantagenet boys, Edward, George, and Richard. Neville became the Earl of Warwick, so I refer to him as Warwick. So anytime I say Warwick, that's who I'm referring to. And then we have Edward of Westminster, who was the son of Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou. I'll refer to Edward of Westminster as Westminster just because it gets really confusing. It's like I said, a lot of the same names are used over and over again at this time. So anyways, getting back to this time period, We're starting in 1461. Edward IV has just been crowned king after defeating the Lancastrian troops at Wakefield. And his reign gave his cousin Warwick. He gave his cousin Warwick a high standing rank within the realm. This really goes to Warwick's head. He's also been referred to as the Kingmaker, and that will make more sense down the line as to why he's referred to that way. But Warwick helped put Edward's court together and dealt with dealing with country affairs, including creating a truce with Scotland. At the time that this is happening, Henry VI was dethroned and was held captive, while his wife, Margaret of Anjou, and their son, Edward of Westminster, escape and have fled from Scotland to France to live in exile. Now, Margaret of Anjou was from France, so she did have that treaty or that truce with them, and had obviously pull with the French court. And also Edward didn't see any profit in killing Henry while Henry's son was still alive, because it would give the Lancastrians more of a push to fight Edward and the Yorks to put Henry back on the throne. So Edward was quite the ladies' man, and he had been rumored to have wed a woman just to bed her, and also rumored to have a son with her. This hasn't been proven, but it is something that would haunt, it hadn't been proven at the time, but it is something that would haunt Edward down the line in the future. While his position on the throne was secure, he was now in need of a queen and heirs to follow him and to solidify his crown. So at first, it was favored to have an alliance with Burgundy, but Warwick persuaded him to negotiate a treaty with Louis XI of France, and even at that time deposing a marriage between Edward and Louis's sister-in-law, Bonne of Savoy, or even Louis's daughter, Anne of France. However, in October of 1464, Warwick had discovered that Edward had been secretly married to Elizabeth Woodville 4 months earlier. This absolutely enraged Warwick. Elizabeth was a Lancastrian widow of a noble, and she was also the mother of 2 boys and had 12 siblings. So this family was, at the time, very much a common family, not one of noble standing, not one with any rank. However, Elizabeth's mother did have some rank, but because she was a woman, she couldn't use it. So the marriage had turned the Woodvilles into a powerful political establishment and not under Warwick's control. That move of Edward's would be a wedge between the two for years to come. The marriage was also criticized by Edward's Privy Council. They felt that the marriage to a woman who wasn't the daughter of a duke or earl was unbefitting to a man of royal blood. So I'm going to go off and do my liner, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I just did my liner. So getting back to it. Warwick had attempted to oust Elizabeth and her mother, Jacquetta, by accusing them of witchcraft. The attempt was not successful, but it still didn't break the relationship between Warwick and Edward. Because of Elizabeth's royal marriage now, her family did benefit from it greatly. Her father, who was a baron prior to her being married, was now made an earl, and became the Lord High Treasurer, and supported the king's alliance with Burgundy, since his wife's family had Burgundy ties. This was done without the knowledge of Warwick, and it left the deal he had made with France doomed. So Warwick was now feeling the loss, because Edward also removed Warwick's brother, the Archbishop of York, from his office of Lord Chancellor. So in 1467, Edward had refused to entertain Warwick's marriage proposal between his eldest daughter, Isabel, and Edward's brother, George, Duke of Clarence. This enraged Warwick again, because I'm sure at this point he's feeling very slighted. So in April of 1469, a rebellion had broke out in York under a leader known as Robin of Redesdale. A second rebellion, pro-Lancastrian rebellion, broke out a month later, demanding the restoration of Henry Percy as Earl of Northumberland. The revolt was squashed, but Warwick and George, Duke of Clarence, spent the summer rallying troops together, officially to suppress the revolt, however, ulterior motives. So in July, they had fled to Calais, where George and Isabel were married in a secret ceremony overseen by Warwick. So after they were married, they returned to London, while he was supposed to remove evil counselors from the king's company and reestablish good governance, and he moved north to meet up with Yorkshire rebels. Also at this time, Warwick was conspiring to depose Edward and put his younger brother George on the throne, and Isabel, his daughter, as queen. There is a little, like, I don't know if I would say caveat, but some of the basis of them trying to do this was another rumor that Edward was illegitimate. There was a whole lot behind that also, but that was a basis that they were using to depose of Edward now. So Redesdale defeated royal troops on July 26th of 1469, and was reportedly killed along with two royal commanders, Elizabeth's father, Earl Rivers, and her brother, John Woodville, were captured and murdered by Warwick. By Warwick's men. Edward was then captured and taken to Middleham Castle, where he was held captive. It was clear that Warwick and Clarence had significant support, but they were unable to calm the growing outrage. So Edward was released in September of that year, and he resumed his role as king. Warwick declared that Warwick and Clarence fled to France, and Louis XI arranged a reconciliation with Margaret of Anjou. Warwick's objective now was to restore Henry to the throne. So this is where his kingmaker nickname comes from. So within the agreement between Warwick and Margaret of Anjou, there was now an arrangement to marry Henry and Margaret's son, Edward of Westminster, to Warwick's youngest daughter, Anne. That marriage did happen. So Warwick and Clarence then invaded England at Dartmouth and Plymouth on September 13th of 1470. So at this point, Edward rushed south to meet the invasion, but he was surrounded and forced to flee with his youngest brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, along with several hundred retainers. They found themselves exiled in Flanders, which was then part of Burgundy. So now Warwick has put Henry VI back on the throne, and Warwick was in control again. Clarence was awarded Duke of York, and while Henry was now king, his new regime was unstable. Many of the Lancastrians still held grudges against Warwick, leaving both him and George very isolated. And also at this time, Edward the Fourth is in Flanders. He ended up leaving Flanders and headed towards England. He also had the Flemish army at his back, so he had a good support system. He landed in Yorkshire and was joined by troops led by Sir William Parr and Sir James Harrington. This convinced Clarence to abandon Warwick and go back to his brother. So Edward's army moved south to London. And once they were there, they took King Henry and put him in the tower, at the Tower of London. And also at this point, Henry was getting very old and very sickly. He was sick on and off prior to this all happening, and there's so much to that I can't put it all in this episode, but we'll do one on Henry VI. I might do a joint Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou episode, but that had a lot to do with what was going on with the War of the Roses as well, and what sparked everything. So Edward had imprisoned Henry VI in the Tower of London. Warwick and his troops met Edward's troops at Barnet, and the fog was very thick that morning. Visibility was very low, but the battle commenced, and Edward was victorious. Warwick had been knocked off his horse and was killed in battle. Margaret and her son, Edward, had made it to Wales, and then they attempted to invade England, but they were intercepted by Edward IV at Tewkesbury and engaged in battle. York again being victorious. Edward of Westminster was killed and Margaret was captured. She was brought to the Tower of London, where her husband was currently imprisoned. I believe it was a few years later, she eventually got back to France. She left and went back to France. But Henry did pass away soon after Edward IV got back to London. It's rumored that Edward had him murdered, but it was reported that his death was due to melancholy because his only son was killed in battle. So Edward IV was now king again, and the Lancastrians seemed to be at bay. The realm was at peace, but there was still some bad blood between the brothers. George was still married to Clarence, was still married to Isabel, but Richard ended up marrying Anne after Westminster had been killed. So the two boys were at each other, and that would be because There was a great fortune left to the two girls by Warwick and his wife, Anne Neville, who was now legally deceased. She did not actually die, but they had her marked as legally dead, basically, so the girls didn't miss out on their inheritance. But that's what was causing the bad blood between Clarence and Richard, because Jarrett with Richard, which did not make him happy. In 1476, Isabel died of childbed fever after she gave birth to their second child, a son named Edward. George had said it was one of her ladies in waiting that had killed Isabel, and he then killed her. However, at that time, a lot of women died of childbed fever. So he had, after Isabel died, he had proposed to become a suitor for Mary of Burgundy. And Edward did not agree with that. So since Edward, I'm going to do my mascara. Since Edward didn't agree with the suitor that George had put forward, George left court completely. Now the realm was at peace. His reign was going well. However, in 1478, Clarence came back around and began causing problems for Edward once again, saying very treasonous things about Edward, to Edward, creating rumors, a lot, just causing massive problems for Edward. So in February of 1478, Edward had him killed for treasonous acts. So the next 5 years went really smoothly. But in 1483, Edward's health began to decline. But before all this happened, he had left he had named his brother Richard as Lord Protector of his son Edward V, soon to be Edward V. And at that time, his son Edward was 12 and was the Prince of Wales. So Edward IV passed away on April 9th of 1483. I am going to end this here because we're ranking on Richard III, and I feel like that needs its complete own separate episode because a lot of things took place at that time. So I did want to end this right here with a little fun fact. If you watch Game of Thrones, York and Lancastrians sound oddly familiar, right? That's because the Starks and the Lannisters are based on the Yorks and the Lancastrians. So I thought that was very fun. And you'll find that a lot, though, in Game of Thrones. You'll find little things that George R.R. Martin used from history, used in the show to create storylines, elaborate on things. But so that's it for this week. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps me out. And please make sure you hit the subscribe button. If you loved it, please leave a comment. If there's also something that you would like to see me do, or a topic on royal history in the UK you'd like to see me talk about or to do, or whatever, please leave me a comment. You can also find me on Instagram under Makeup and Monarchies. Thank you so much for watching this today. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next episode. Thanks. Bye.